Hello there, folks. Nosk here. Right off the bat, I'd like to thank Fox from the West for giving me the opportunity to have a video hosted on his channel. It's greatly appreciated. Cheers, mate. But now, on to the topic of this video. As you'd probably already noticed by the title of this video, we're going to sit down and have us a little chat. A chat about the self-defeating ideas of the modern progressive movement, particularly as it relates to the United States, Canada, and other Western nations primarily, as these areas are where it is overwhelmingly most prominent. I'm confident by now that you may be aware of a few different ideas and groups which are a part of this modern progressivism. Ideas such as social justice, intersectionality, postmodernism, third-wave feminism, etc. Groups such as Black Lives Matter, the National Organization for Women, and countless more. Not to mention the dozens, if not hundreds, of student activist groups on university and college campuses across the United States and other Western nations, and other related community groups with which a great number of these students also operate. In this video, we're going to touch on a few of these things, and I'm going to give you my perspective on why these ideas and groups not only set a dangerous precedent with many of their perspectives, messages, and demands, but also why I believe they are self-defeating ideological positions and values within the scope of modern, liberal, egalitarian societies such as our own. Before I get into the nitty-gritty here, I do have to ensure that I make it apparent that this video is simply an opinion piece. These are simply my views and my perspective on the matter, and in no way reflect the views of Fox from the West. I do not, nor will I ever, presume to speak for him and his views. If you take issue with this video or anything said therein, you're free to address me directly if you are so inclined via the contact links provided in the description of this video. Don't go attacking Fox because of my views or arguments. But anyways, let's get on with it, shall we? The ideals of modern progressivism rely heavily on the concepts put forward by a toxic mix of social justice and intersectional theory. In a way, I guess by comparison to social justice of old, you could call this new one social justice plus. In the modern context, intersectional theory plays an extremely heavy part, whereby the idea of privileges and oppressions are applied across a wide spectrum of identities. Identities which are designated in accordance to innate features of an individual, such as their race, gender, and sexual orientation. You know, things about a person which they're born into and, realistically speaking, they can't change. These concepts of privileges and oppressions rely almost entirely on a basis of the histories of Western nations. For example, is the idea that due to the historical reality of the enslavement of Africans at the hands of European powers, as well as former colonies of said powers, such as the United States, that this translates into modern oppressions of blacks in these countries, despite the abolition of slavery in these places for at least 150 years, and despite the victories of civil rights movements and the like. Of course, amusingly enough, once you take these ideas outside of Western spheres and apply them to other areas of the world, such as, let's say, Africa or the Middle East or even Asia, they not only begin to fall apart, but when argued from their very own perspective, modern intersectional progressives will actively attempt to counter their own narratives, or move the goalpost of their ideas and accusations, particularly those about white supremacy and patriarchy, in order to somehow justify that they apply not just to Western nations, but to the entire world at large. Somehow. I know, I don't get it either how white men suddenly somehow run the entire world, but I digress. This kind of mindset and reasoning is readily applied not only to race, but also to gender, sexuality, religion, and essentially any manner of identity that one could rationally, or not so rationally, designate as one. As such, this sets up a situation whereby, despite equality under the law by means of equal representation, anti-discrimination laws, equal pay laws, and the like, people can make claims of oppression and discrimination against majority groups and institutions themselves, rather than concern themselves with individual actions. Essentially, it becomes collectivized whining. For example, how, by ignoring individual circumstance and situations, blacks can collectively lay blame for any issue they have onto all white people, and by dint of being the majority racial demographic, and reasonably holding the majority of government and institutional positions of power and influence, they make claims that this is a white supremacy, or how women ignore individual circumstances and can blame the collective ills of all women on men and call it the patriarchy. Liberal and progressive values, for a long time, were concerned with inclusion, equal treatment, equality of opportunity, equal representation, equal rights, but also with individuality. These are the concerns which gave us an end to slavery, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, equal pay laws, workers' rights, and much, much more, in order to legally ensure that these values were applied and upheld on national levels. Social justice at the time was a genuine force for positive change. With the mutation of the social justice movement thanks to intersectional theory, however, we are beginning to see these values unravel in the form of racial and gender quotas for government and business, demands for segregated spaces for people of a certain gender, skin color, religion, or sexuality, demands for special privileges under the guise of equity. By its very nature, intersectional theory is divisive, collectively grouping people together and apart from others, based on innate characteristics. This kind of genuinely trivial division allows these groups to form into echo chambers where only a limited perspective is actively disseminated, fueling biases and hatreds towards those outside of it. It attempts to force an in-group, out-group dichotomy and mindset. In a certain respect, it's very similar to how cults operate. The effects of this result in improper and often misguided perspectives. Judging others negatively because of their skin color, their gender, their religion, their sexuality, etc. It actively encourages racism, sexism, and bigotry, while at the same time attempting to excuse it by redefining terms and concepts. For example, how racism and sexism are not just judging people based upon their gender or their skin color, or holding any kind of negative perspectives because of these innate characteristics. It's now suddenly prejudice plus power, whereby majority demographics, be it nationally or within a certain circumstance, are made to accept the collective blame. Some may consider intersectional theory to be a vast and convoluted web of sorts, with every little concept being used in a manner to justify the others in some way. This kind of divisiveness serves only to segregate not only people, but ideas. For example, how the progressive movement looks to essentially claim the banner of all people of color, all people within the LGBT community, all women, etc. However, when any individuals within these groups do speak out against the concepts that the modern progressive movement has put forth, far more often than not, they are derided, they are harassed, they are verbally abused, they are called horrible things such as a black person who refuses to commit to social justice, being called a house nigger or a coon, or attempting to dismiss women who do not hold up to the social justice ideals as having internalized misogyny. Inevitably, the consistent fracturing leaves the movement as a whole without a cohesive voice or message. The divisive and bigoted views being espoused will turn a significant number of people away, resulting in further ideological isolation. This, of course, forces them to become much more fervent in their attempts to make changes to the societies in which they operate, such as through indoctrination in higher education, and in some cases, through legislation. This causes a foreseeable pushback, which we see today in the form of conservatives, libertarians, centrists, and liberals standing up to and arguing against the modern progressive movement. This is the inevitability of the modern progressive movement. As they continue to become louder, more and more segments of society will stand up to rebuff them and their attempts at essentially dismantling the values and ideals which allowed Western nations to evolve and develop into the inclusive, fair, diverse societies that they are today. While modern progressives talk of equality, they seek to grant benefits and privileges to some at the expense of others. While they talk of free speech, they actively seek to silence not only in matters of discourse and debate, but the very things we say within society at large in attempts to thought police and punish those who say certain things or share certain ideas. While they talk of inclusivity, they seek to divide us in accordance to our skin color, our religions, our sexualities, our genders, and so on. These attempts are why modern intersectional progressivism is its own worst enemy. This is why it is a self-defeating ideology. When the progressive movement can shed itself of intersectionalism, identity politics, and divisive rhetoric, it can then get back on the track of its earlier form, and genuinely fight for positive positions reasonably, rationally, and effectively. This has been the Wolf's Word. Woof woof, motherfuckers.